Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad at least today I'm amongst friends, my fellow brethren, my former brethren. I think I'm still part of the legal profession. Once you're a lawyer, you're always a lawyer, as some of my colleagues tell me once in a while when I'm arguing with them. I'm very pleased that GenZero has actually taken it upon itself to convene a meeting of lawyers to discuss issues relating to climate change, and in particular issues relating to enablers for us to effect a just transition. One clear example is the relevance of voluntary carbon markets, carbon offsets, carbon credits. And I'll talk a little bit about it as we go along. So we all know that climate change is a defining crisis of our lifetime and beyond. The 2023 marked the hottest year on record globally, and 2024 looks as though it may even surpass 2023. I think we feel it in Singapore as we felt it also in other parts of the world. There's no one country that will not be affected. We're an interconnected world. Greenhouse gas emissions do not respect boundaries, and so therefore anything that happens in one part of the world has an impact in other parts of the world. The problem that we face today is not just about what it takes to get to net zero in 2050, but really the enabler for that is to some extent, as of now, rather deficient, and that is finance, climate finance. And we need climate finance to scale by a magnitude of 3 to 6 times more than what it is today to catalyze solutions and to avoid a climate disaster, not just for us, but for future generations. And if it's left unsolved, if climate change is left unsolved, there will be irreversible impacts on both humans and the wider ecosystem. And even in this discussion about what it takes for just transition, there is in fact a bit of I would say, a clash between the issues that we need to think about in relation to energy transition and biodiversity loss. And somehow we'll have to find a way to navigate these two issues that we have to take into consideration. The climate crisis cannot be tackled by any single entity or any single country, so collaboration is a key, and collaboration amongst like-minded persons forming strategic partnerships, augmenting capabilities in order to address the key aspects of climate change. Take Singapore as an example. We're a small island state, just 729 square kilometers, in the middle of a low-lying archipelagic region in the heart of Southeast Asia, and we're particularly susceptible to climate change being an island. Yet, we've been doing a lot to stave off climate change. The most important thing that we have in mind is to ensure that we fortify our coastal defenses. In particular, we're putting in place polders in order to ensure that we can fight rising sea levels, hopefully over the next 50 years or so. Singapore's decarbonisation is highly dependent on international cooperation due to our limited land and alternative energy resources. We don't have the ability to have significant solar generation in Singapore because of land and because we have significant cloud cover. So the most we can have is about 8% of solar. We have no wind, being so close to the equator, no offshore wind. So therefore, we're very reliant on a few things. One is to reduce carbon emissions ourselves. Second, hopefully to promote electrification. And 3, to look for importation of alternative fuel sources. So this requires us to take a proactive role in leveraging collaboration and multilateralism to enhance global trade and promote a rules-based international order. And so therefore, our approach to achieve our decarbonization goals and contribute to climate change action is one which is multifaceted and involves ultimately partnerships with many. So voluntary carbon markets, in our view, is an essential partner to scale global decarbonization. The voluntary carbon market allows us to realize a low carbon future. It is not just a tool to offset emissions in hard-to-abate sectors, it is also an enabler for financing to scale climate solutions. Now, Temasek itself has significant investments in hard-to-abate sectors, which is why we take this issue quite seriously. We own an airline, and it's not like we can sell the airline. So that airline, pre-COVID, was recording something like about 17 million tons of CO2 equivalent. We own power generation companies which have effectively natural gas in Singapore, although they have green energy elsewhere. We own a port, so as you know, ports do emit significant amounts of carbon as well. So we are, in fact, blessed with carbon-emitting companies, which hopefully are on the pathway to reducing carbon emissions and decarbonizing. The voluntary carbon market also supports abatement channels for finance and into critical areas that lack funding. Now, while compliance markets can be effective, implementation of high ambition carbon tax on ETS or emissions trading systems is often difficult due to political and economic considerations. The voluntary carbon market therefore helps to support decarbonization in sectors beyond the reach of compliance schemes. Projects that monetize carbon credits through the VCM can use carbon revenues to protect nature, conserve biodiversity, and support sustainable development. However, the voluntary carbon markets are at a critical inflection point. They need to scale up rapidly, but multiple pain points are holding them back. Recent macroeconomic conditions, especially with high inflation and rising and higher interest rates for longer, combined with increased global scrutiny and a lack of regulatory clarity, have significantly dampened demand. Furthermore, variability in credit quality and a lack of standardization have exacerbated these challenges, impeding the market's growth and credibility. At Temasek, we recognize the need for a thriving, credible, and transparent carbon market alongside carbon avoidance, mitigation, and reduction efforts to meet our net zero goals. This is one of the reasons why we committed a significant amount of capital to establish GenZero to accelerate decarbonization globally and drive positive climate change. Now, they have been making progress in the carbon markets through initiatives such as the launch of the Carbon Markets 2.0 white paper and the recent paper on clarifying the legal characteristics of voluntary carbon credits, as well as facilitating necessary collaboration on voluntary carbon markets and pushing for high integrity credits. So the markets, in order to survive, must embody two concepts, the concepts of trust and integrity, because only that will give rise to liquidity and market pricing that can bring more capital to bear on projects that will allow us to get to net zero. So through GenZero, we continue to strengthen the carbon markets infrastructure and ecosystem. And that we also do through our investment in Climate Impact X, our voluntary carbon exchange, with 3 other partners, which we set up with 3 other partners as a marketplace for effective trading of carbon credits. So CIX has made significant strides since its inception. It has facilitated transactions exceeding 2 million tons of carbon credits across its platforms since inception. Globally, the world has taken decisive steps towards progressing the development of voluntary carbon markets. The Voluntary Carbon Markets Initiative, VCMI, launched its Claims Code of Practice in 2023, a rule book that outlines the criteria for high integrity use of carbon credits, is aimed at standardizing definitions and reducing greenwashing in the voluntary carbon markets. The Claims Code will bring confidence and credibility to voluntary carbon markets and to claims that involve the use of carbon credits. It provides concrete guidance on how to use carbon credits within climate strategies. There is, however, the pivotal role of multilateral collaboration between governments. We have seen how international cooperation aligned with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement has helped advance the implementation of high-integrity carbon markets. For example, Singapore played a role in signing agreements with several countries on a bilateral basis, fostering international partnerships to facilitate the transfer of mitigation outcomes between countries. The future of carbon markets hinges on seeking common ground. Improvements in methodologies, harmonization of standards, and advancements in technology can help carbon markets to evolve into robust, effective instruments that contribute significantly to our climate goals. This evolution can also improve support for biodiversity conservation and sustainable livelihoods. Collaboration among governments, corporations, and market participants is essential to bring about the evolution of carbon markets and to deliver decarbonization impact at scale. Now, what is the role of lawyers in all of this? You know, many parts of the legal profession, since I started practicing law about 34 years ago, might be said to be in decline. But one area which is in ascent is definitely the area of climate change. And frankly, there's a huge role for lawyers to play in every part from policy formulation and implementation all the way through to commercialization strategies. So how can lawyers be the cement connecting the various parts of the ecosystem to drive change and foster greater trust in carbon markets? How can lawyers also better play the role of solution provider to accelerate carbon impact, such as to work towards establishing clarity of the legal nature of voluntary carbon credits? Lawyers have a multidisciplinary lens, whether in-house, whether part of government or in private practice, and you all perform a critical function partnering with stakeholders in ESG transformation. Stakeholders will increasingly be seeking advice on navigating the complex regulatory landscape, managing potential liabilities, and addressing reputational risks. All the more so when there's no global standard applicable, and more importantly, the taxonomy has not been agreed on a harmonized basis. So lawyers are uniquely placed to contribute to this transformation. Your focus on the intersection of law, business, policy, and reputation is critical to the multidisciplinary lens that is required to manage the complex web of ESG standards and laws. For example, the requirement for ISSB standards to be incorporated into sustainability reporting for listed companies requires lawyers to have a deep understanding of not just the accounting standards and listing rules, but also what is a market standard for disclosures, current climate controversies, and the drafting to present complex material in a coherent and understandable manner. Another example is the development of the voluntary carbon markets itself. The combination of skills required to be a good legal advisor there is unique. An understanding of international public law and standards, the Paris Agreement, for example, and the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets and their framework, science, environment, trading, and project development are all required. There's also another area which is critical for lawyers' participation, and that is to help us ensure that there is an avoidance of greenwashing. Increasingly, lawyers will be required to exercise their judgment and counsel on what can be disclosed on ESG efforts, whether in information memoranda, advertising materials, or even claims on websites. With the avalanche of regulations, entities need to be careful of what they say or avoid getting to the other extreme and be less ambitious in stating their ESG progress. In summary, lawyers have skill sets, detail orientation, strategic thinking, and sound judgment, negotiation skills, and project management skills, which are invaluable in the context of ESG transformation. You should use these skills to facilitate our ESG journey, or better still, our entire climate change journey towards net zero in 2050. There's a need to grow Asia's climate financing toolbox. Offerings for sustainability-linked financial instruments in the region remain limited despite the market potential. Scaling up such instruments in developing countries could allow issuers to tap into new sources of finance, including areas which are really innovative. Transition financing is important, especially in these emerging markets where there are limited options for energy sources available for the market's development. It is imperative for Asia to grow its climate financing toolbox, to grow the green economy, and green the entire economy. From carbon markets, debt instruments targeting specific sectors, to radical collaborations including crowding in of public, private, and philanthropic capital, all these need to be mainstreamed to accelerate a clean and inclusive transition in Asia. Now, public policy and government action can help attract investment, for example, through incentives and disincentives, while the private sector, multilateral development banks, international financial institutions, and concessional finance all play complementary roles. Importantly, legal expertise will be required in the architecting, implementation, and governance of capital solutions and transition projects such as blended financing, transition credits, joint ventures, and even coal-fired power plant phase-outs. At Temasek, we believe in breaking new ground through ventures and partnerships. To accelerate the pace of decarbonization, we work to catalyze change and innovation, including areas that address today's climate challenges. We recognize that tackling the climate emergency requires acceleration of decarbonization strategies, particularly in the hard-to-abate sectors. So we are an anchor investor in several ventures, such as Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which invests in growth equity in decarbonization solutions, like, for example, reducing CO2 emissions in the production of cement or in green steel. So we focus on also late-stage clean tech and hopefully solutions that can be mainstream and therefore contribute towards climate change and transition in particular. Blended finance is an important tool for climate finance, especially in this part of the world, because energy transition must come with energy affordability, and you can't get there unless you have concessionary financing, and blended finance is the mechanism to get that in. And it de-risks climate investments and helps address barriers for commercial capital, bridging the financing gap for green sustainable infrastructure. Concessionary and philanthropic capital providers contribute first loss capital to de-risk investments and unlocking the capital stack to crowd in financing for private investors. Temasek established a joint venture with HSBC about 2 years ago. It's called Pentagreen Capital. Its main purpose is to provide debt financing for marginally bankable transactions to help make those transactions more bankable and therefore crowd in not just financing from banks, but also to allow investors to get a decent return on their capital. We hope to actually deploy something like $1 billion on these financing instruments in the next few years, and hopefully that can capitalize up to 10 times that amount of financing from traditional sources. More interestingly, FAST-P, which is called the Financing Asia's Transition Partnership, a joint venture between MES, a firm in the US called Allied Capital Partners, the International Finance Corporation, and Temasek, seek to bridge gaps in Asia's sustainable infrastructure financing through the deployment of blended finance to supercharge Asia's energy transition by increasing the bankability of green and sustainable projects. So this initiative demonstrates how different sources of finance can come together in an innovative and complementary way to address Asia's financing gap. So in this case, the MES is providing some form of concessionary capital. ACP is also providing concessionary capital. Temasek is providing some form of concessionary financing, and the IFC will bring its tools from the World Bank as well as its capital. Temasek has also joined the Transition Credits Coalition called Traction as a knowledge partner. It was launched by the MES at COP28, and it comprises members and partners that will examine the challenges and solutions needed to scale the early retirement of unabated coal-fired power plants in Asia through transition carbon credits. Given the critical importance of accelerating the early retirement of coal-fired power plants, Temasek's joining of the coalition is a reflection of a strong commitment to support decarbonization efforts globally. Now, we also believe in climate technology and climate tech solutions. So back in 2021, we formed a joint venture with BlackRock called Decarbonisation Partners, and we set up a fund which is about 1.4 billion US, not just funded by Temasek, but by other investors as well. And the purpose there is to actually invest in late-stage venture capital and early-stage growth equity companies we're targeting de-risk technologies across clean energy, electrification, green materials, and a circular digital economy. So you can see that this is an emerging field, and it goes side by side with traditional areas for venture capital and growth equity. So it's another area for which legal expertise is clearly required. And not just because of the fact that it is an investment class, but because we need to understand the science behind what we are seeking to achieve with these solutions, and whether that science can become reality in the form of engineering technology and solutions. So as an investment company anchored in Asia, perhaps we can offer some observations. The world is not yet on track to reach net zero, and Asia is where the action needs to happen, at scale and at speed. Asia is the most populous continent and is the most diverse global region. It also faces slow progress from heavy reliance on fossil fuels and a lack of access to better solutions. Being geographically dispersed also makes the challenge of energy transition enormous. Asia accounts for half of the global carbon emissions, with about 85% of our energy produced from fossil fuels. We recognize the importance and urgency of transitioning the energy systems away from fossil fuels. However, in many markets across Asia, coal still represents a significant part of the energy mix. And particularly here is that most coal-fired power plants are only 12 to 15 years old on average, which makes it very difficult to have a viable business model for transition. So the priorities in emerging markets in Asia are actually quite different to developed nations, as the need to pursue economic growth and balance social issues such as standard of living and livelihoods are important. Issues like energy security and ensuring reliable and affordable access to electricity are also key considerations. So as much as climate change is critical for Asia, uplifting of communities requires a just transition. They too need access to electricity, and right now the cheapest source of electricity is in fact coal. So something has to be done to provide financing so that we can have that transition to green, so that future generations have the benefit of electricity from a greener source. Realistically, emerging and fossil-based economies, especially those in Southeast Asia, face disproportionate exposures to the cost of a net zero transition. Southeast Asia will need over $1.5 trillion in cumulative investment by 2030 to meet its reduction targets, which is to reduce emissions by approximately 33% by 2030, versus the $6.3 billion in green capital flows observed in 2023. Hence, we need to strive not just for transition, but a just transition, where the impact on jobs and communities are mitigated and no one is left behind. So for all of us who are lawyers, we have to be interested in this. We have to keep abreast of developing climate, ESG regulations, issues, pain points, educating ourselves, our businesses, our clients, our companies, in the developments in law, in climate action, in sustainability, and the relevant legal frameworks, including disclosures and emissions reporting. We also have a duty to help our clients to be future ready and resilient by operating sustainably, having supply chains that can stay resilient in the face of sustainability disclosure requirements. They need to effect change through every contract that they are entering into, and they should seek to promote climate-aligned contracting. Incorporating climate clauses that promote eco-friendly operations in contracts helps the planet by enabling businesses to take the lead in transitioning to net zero operations. This will be one of the topics I believe which will be discussed later today. So for the lawyers and those working in government bodies and regulators, the need to support the development of climate-friendly policies and regulations is there, as lawyers have the knowledge and power to influence policy and legislative challenges and changes. There's a need to develop legal frameworks to enable the green transition. There's also ultimately, most importantly, a need to share knowledge to promote awareness around environmental laws and regulations to clients, the public, and amongst the brethren. The Temasek legal and regulatory team has played an active role in this respect by participating in numerous international forums and panels to create awareness on the key issues in this developing market. I would say that this is one area which is truly lifelong learning. All of us are on a journey, not just a journey to effect change, but a journey to learn. And as time goes on, we will get better and better at what we do. And for lawyers in particular, because we're used to lifelong learning, this should be like water off a duck's back. At Temasek, we do believe that our legal team has to participate in associations and bodies around the world, not just because we should be advocates for change, but also we want to learn from each other and we want to imbibe the latest thinking that is in the global marketplace. So in conclusion, I think it's imperative for us to embrace an open mind, to continuously learn, innovate, and adapt the construct of law to unlock solutions and pave the way forward. We need radical collaboration and cross-sharing of knowledge and best practices to get to a destination sooner. This is part of the reason why we're gathering this afternoon. In-house counsel, lawyers in private practice, lawyers in public sector, lecturers, students, business colleagues to share and learn and make connections. So let us all build up capabilities to enable economic value capture, establish a strong pipeline of talent with the skill sets, capabilities, experience to support companies, investments, and projects and transactions that will help to achieve a low-carbon future. I want to close by saying that the issue of climate change is not one that just belongs to governments, to multilateral agencies, to financiers, to investors, to companies, but it belongs to all of us as individuals. We all have a role to play. I remember one of my former colleagues reminded me, when she had heard me preach about climate change a few years ago. And I would use the word preach because I think that sometimes is something, sometimes I do, but I should actually hold back from doing. She reminded me that 15 years ago, our law firm committed to the Economic Development Board that we will participate in a pilot to reduce our emissions by 10%. And there was a very simple way for us to get to 10% as individuals. We all would undertake not to drive our car 1 day a week. Now you consider 7 days a week. If you don't drive your car 1 day a week, that's 14% less emissions. Yeah? So it's not that we can't contribute to the things needed for climate change. You know, the first thing we need is not the alternative energy sources that can come and help us have a greener future. The first thing we need to do is to reduce our own carbon emissions, whether it's company, government, whether it's us as individuals. You know, for the companies, it's even important to reduce your carbon intensity per dollar of revenue or whatever unit is the right measurement. Then only can the other steps taken, whether it's electrification, whether it is about building more renewable energy plants and the infrastructure for it, whether it's by using biofuels for aviation, only then can it work. Even for aviation, it's very tough to get to net zero because the only way to do so is sustainable aviation fuel, which costs between 3 to 6 times that of jet fuel. Are we prepared to pay the extra cost for the ticket to take on the cost of sustainable aviation fuel? That's a question we have to ask. The alternative is, of course, to travel less. You know, not so good for our airline, but good for the climate. So we all have a role to play in this, not just for ourselves, but for the future generations, especially for those of us who have children and grandchildren. Let us hope that we ourselves take the step to create a better future for all of them. And you as lawyers, you have a huge, huge opportunity to actually influence all of us. Thank you.